You don't attract what you want. You attract what you are. And as you sit quietly, something within you begins to remember what it once dared to feel. The idea that felt too large, too beautiful, too impossible for this world. You held it once. And now, like a fragrance returning on the wind, it begins again. Not as desire, as memory. You did not hope. You knew. The moment the numbers aligned, you didn't feel surprise. You felt recognition. Because the scene had already lived itself through you. In silence, before the world called it real. You spoke words no one else heard. You entered the silence no one else dared to keep. And in that holy hush, reality reassembled itself around your word. This is not about games of chance. There is no chance. There is only law, and the words you repeated, the ones that reshaped your world, were never spells to command the outer. They were mirrors to claim the inner. You weren't convincing God. You were becoming God. You said them not to get something, but to remind yourself of what had already been given. The lottery wasn't won out there. It was remembered in here. And so, as you sit with that sacred longing, that hush before the manifestation, listen closely. Not to the outer clamor, not to the mind that screams for proof. Listen to the subtle trembling within. That is the voice of I am. That is the seed before the sprout, the light before the dawn, the claim before the crown. Most assume manifestation begins when action begins. But the divine truth is this: manifestation begins in rest, in stillness, in the unseen, in the quiet room where you dare to feel the end before the beginning makes sense. It was in that room that I first said it. It is done, and the world did not change. The sky did not crack open. No angels sang. But my breath changed. My spine softened. My heart loosened its grip on the old story. And in that breath, in that sacred exhale, I knew, not hoped, not believed, knew. You do not move the world by effort. You move the world by assumption. The world is clay. Your imagination is the potter's hand. When you speak, speak from the end, not to summon it, but to abide in it. There is no power in begging. There is infinite power in being. So I said it again, not louder, but deeper. It is done, not to convince reality, but to remind consciousness. My inner speech became a river, not pushing, but flowing. The inner conversation was no longer will it happen, but how natural this is now. I walked through the corridors of my home differently. I poured coffee in a morning that no longer feared lack. I smiled at strangers with the quiet knowing of a man whose world had already reformed itself. The words weren't magical, they were structural. They rebuilt the frame of my identity, and identity is the only place where true change lives. You can say all the affirmations in the world, but if they do not alter who you know yourself to be, they are just noise. But when a word slips beneath the surface and takes root in the soil of your inner man, the harvest is inevitable. Feel this now. Feel the weight of already having. Not just the thing, but the version of you who always had it. Notice what drops away when you inhabit that space. The grasping, gone. The anxiety, dissolved. The doubt, silenced by knowing. Faith is not a performance. It is rest in the unseen reality. The world calls it delusion. Heaven calls it creation. For what is seen was not made out of what is visible. You were told this long ago, but only now are you ready to hear it. Not as scripture, but as self. Hebrews 11:3. Through faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that things which are seen were not made of things which do appear. Do you see? Your words do not describe reality, they frame it. When I said I won, I was not lying to myself. I was telling the truth before it appeared. And because I stayed with that truth, not anxiously, but faithfully, reality surrendered. But here's the mystery. Most never realize. The mystery is this: most do not fail because they lack the desire, or even the faith, but because they refuse to remain. They touched the end lightly, like fingers grazing a flame, but did not dwell in it. They peeked behind the curtain of assumption, then returned to the old world of appearances. And so the seed was never watered. The birth was never carried to term. You remained, That was the difference. You made your home in the invisible. You made the unseen more real than what eyes could behold. And while the world rushed and shouted and checked the numbers in panic or hope, you walked silently, knowing you had already arrived. The envelope had not yet opened, the numbers not yet called, but the truth had settled like sacred oil across your chest. It is done. And so you said it again, not as a ritual, not as a command, but as a remembering. I have already won. Notice the shift that brings. Feel how those words breathe. Not I will, not I want, but I have. The tone is different. The body softens, the soul exhales. There is no fight in the man who knows he has already received. This is the law, not a rule imposed by some distant deity, but a principle etched into the very substance of reality. As within, so without. When you repeat the word from the end, when you speak as the one who has, the outer begins to mirror the inner with exquisite obedience, not always in your timing, but always by your permission, for nothing appears without first being spoken inwardly. Creation is never from outside in, it is always from consciousness outward. So you said it, in the still of night, in the quiet of your car, as you washed your hands, as you walked through the supermarket, not in desperation, in delight. You spoke the word as one speaks to a familiar friend. I have already won. You did not need the ticket to say it. You did not wait for proof to feel it. You brought the feeling of winning into the present, into your temple, and because you did, reality had no choice but to align. The voice in your head tried to protest. The mind whispered its doubts, but you did not fight them. You simply returned to the word. You let it carry you back to your seat of knowing. That is the secret most overlooked. You don't wrestle with the old man, you replace him. You do not argue with doubt, you transcend it through identity. Identity is the root of all manifestation. You don't manifest what you want, you manifest what you are. And so the words you repeat are not mere sounds, they are seeds, identity in bloom, and every repetition is a watering, a softening, a returning, until one day, the words are no longer separate from you, they are you. You don't say I have already won. You live as the one who did. You breathe like him, walk like him, sit like him, think like him. It becomes quiet after that. Not empty, but full. Not passive, but deeply still. The world still turns, the hands still move, but your center is unmoved. You are anchored in the end, and that anchoring is what the world calls a miracle. Let others speak of odds and logic and probabilities. You speak from the end. You let the river of assumption carry you beyond what minds can calculate. And then without striving, without force, it appears, as naturally as breath, as gently as dawn. You hear the numbers, you feel no shock, only that ancient recognition, the feeling of truth arriving exactly as you had already felt it. It is not a lottery win, it is a memory restored. And yet there is something even deeper this reveals, because if it could appear so effortlessly, if something the world calls rare could unfold like breath from your being, what else have you forgotten is already yours? What other treasures lie hidden behind the veil of belief, waiting only for the soft voice of your assumption to call them forth? You begin to realize, it was never about the numbers, the money, or the moment. Those were symbols, sacred echoes of something deeper. The external win was simply the echo of an inner return. The treasure was always your identity. You are not becoming the one who wins. You are remembering that you are the one who always did. This is not arrogance. This is reverence. A holy reverence for the power entrusted to you from the beginning. The power to assume, to feel, to speak from the end, and thereby call the unseen into form. You are not subject to circumstances. Circumstances are subject to you. And so you rest in the knowing. You walk softly in the world, not from caution, but from sovereignty. The air seems clearer, the ground steadier, not because the world changed, but because you did. The great lie was that you had to earn it. That worthiness was somewhere far away, guarded by effort and sacrifice. But the kingdom has always been within you, waiting, not for you to prove yourself, but for you to awaken. You awaken not by striving, but by surrendering to the truth of who you are. You say the words not to convince yourself, but to undress the lie. The more you say them, the less effort they carry, the more you feel their truth. I am the one who already has. And with each repetition, not louder, but deeper, you build the bridge from image to embodiment. Your tone changes, the weight in your chest dissolves. The old you, the one who waited, begged, doubted, begins to fade like a shadow at sunrise. You stop asking when, you stop needing how, you live in the holy place of now. And here is the mystery hidden in that silence. When you no longer seek the thing comes easily. When you no longer chase the result arrives, drawn by the magnetic field of your being. This is the paradox of all creation. When you live in the end, you invite the means, but when you cling to the means, you push the end further away. Feel this now, not as theory, but as embodiment. Let the words rise not from your mouth, but from your essence. I am the one who already has. I remember what the world forgets. I abide in the unseen. These are not affirmations, they are activations. Every thought after that bows to the assumption. Every action flows without strain. You are not performing faith, you are abiding in identity. And so the lottery appears again and again, not by force, but by law, not by chance, but by correspondence. For to him who has, more shall be given, not because of greed, but because of gravity. The state of already having draws more unto itself. It is not reward, it is reflection, and the reflection grows clearer each time, more effortless, more immediate, because you no longer doubt the mirror. You know what must follow. When the inner image is fixed, so the numbers appear, the tickets unfold, the wins accumulate. But still, it is not about the outer, it never was. It is about the being, who has remembered his place at the center of all things. The one who no longer waits, no longer wishes, but simply is. And as you let this truth settle into you like warm light, there is one final veil that begins to tremble. And as that veil quivers, something ancient stirs within you. Not a thought, but a knowing, a soft remembrance that all things, all forms, all fortunes, are but reflections of your own divine arrangement, that the outer world is not happening to you, it is issuing from you. What if the numbers that appeared weren't merely lucky combinations, but reflections of inner harmony? What if every winning ticket was a mirror to a state already claimed, a vibration already sustained? What if the true code wasn't ink on paper, but the silent pattern of your inner speech? You begin to feel the symmetry. Each time the win arrived, you were not striving, you were surrendered. You were not yearning, you were yielding to what was already real in you. You did not force the fruit, you became the tree. I am the tree planted by rivers of water, that bringeth forth fruit in season. Psalm 1:3. And when you speak from that rooted place, life bends toward you, not in flattery, but in obedience. Because your word is not wish, it is law. You say, I have already received, and the world echoes back in form. You whisper, it is mine, and reality rushes to arrange itself around your claim, not because you shouted, but because you believed, not because you demanded, but because you assumed. The assumption is the womb of the world. You do not ask, will it come? You dwell in the knowing that it is already here, clothed in unseen substance, awaiting only your rest, not your effort, your rest. The seed does not struggle to grow, it only abides in the soil of its design. So you tend to your inner soil, you weed out contradiction, you do not entertain stories of delay, unworthiness, or lack. You do not rehearse the old identity. You stay, you remain, you return again and again to the words spoken in stillness. I already have. Feel the truth now, without effort. Let it settle on you like a soft garment. Feel what changes when you say it, without trying to make it true. When you say it from the place where it already is, let the body remember, let the breath deepen, let the world around you dissolve into its rightful place, a screen upon which your consciousness projects its sacred film. And in this deepening stillness, a new understanding arises. You did not win the lottery 8 times because of repetition alone. You won because repetition became identity. Identity became embodiment, and embodiment has no choice but to manifest. Your words must become flesh. You do not speak to get, you speak to be, and from being, all things flow. So now, when you say it, I am the one who wins always, you say it not to reach forward, but to rest back, to relax into the timeline already unfolding from the fullness of your assumption, and the world bends again, gently, easily, elegantly. Another win appears, another symbol of your inner alignment makes itself known, but it is no longer surprising. It is natural, it is inevitable, it is yours by law. You do not need to figure out how, you only need to remain in the state where the thing is already done, not imagined from afar,
but inhabited from within. And so your life becomes a stream of confirmations, not because the outer world leads, but because the inner world commands. You begin to realize, this power is not selective, it is not limited to money, or numbers, or chance. It touches every corner of existence, every relationship, every health condition, every circumstance. All of it waits for your word. But there is one illusion still clinging to the edge of consciousness, one final thread that must be released before the full garment of power is worn without seam or wrinkle. And that final thread is the belief that anything is outside of you, that any power lies in the paper, the prize, the platform, that the win is in the world. But the truth is too simple, too radiant, for the reasoning mind to accept. You are the source of all that appears. The ticket is not the cause, it is the effect. The numbers are not the power, they are the echo. The outcome is not the gift, it is the mirror, showing you what you dared to claim in the silence before sound. Let that settle into your bones. You are not reacting to life, life is reacting to you. Every event, every coincidence, every so-called chance occurrence, is the offspring of your inner assumption. So you begin to understand, the words you repeated were not magic in themselves, they were permission. They gave you entry into a version of yourself that already existed. They were a door, and you walked through. Each time you whispered, I have already won, you weren't casting a spell, you were remembering a self who never needed to chase or plead or perform, a self who simply is. And in that self, there is no lack, no waiting, no maybe. There is only the calm certainty of fulfilled law, not as commandment, but as design. You speak, and it is so. You feel, and it appears. You assume, and the world, like a faithful servant, rearranges itself to match. You do not earn, you allow. And as this truth deepens, you begin to see through the veil of personality. The one who wanted, the one who feared, the one who tried. That self was never the author, it was the mask, the costume, the actor forgetting the script he once wrote in light. But now the script returns, the inner word is restored. You sit once more in the secret place, and the voice of I am speaks not as concept, but as current, living, immediate, undeniable. I am the one who already has, not someday, not hopefully, now, and now is the only power that ever exists. So the repetition changes, it becomes less frequent, but more alive. Fewer words, greater weight. Each time you say it, it rings with completion. Each time you feel it, the echo in the world grows louder, and something sacred happens. The desire quiets, not because it disappeared, but because it has been fulfilled. The outer may not yet show it, but within, it is finished. And that is all that matters. When you are faithful to the unseen, the seen becomes faithful to you. You walk into rooms differently. You meet life not as a beggar, but as a king in disguise. Your inner speech is no longer a wish list, it is a decree. Not shouted, not forced, but calm, steady, resolved. And the winds keep coming, but you no longer count them. You no longer need them to feel safe or whole. You smile at them like an old friend returning home. Lovely, but no longer necessary for your peace, because your peace was never in the prize, it was always in the posture of knowing. Now something stirs at the edge of your imagination, a new possibility, a deeper application. If this power can shape money, what else can it shape? If it can bend odds, what else can it transform? What stories are still waiting to be rewritten from the end? You feel the invitation rise, not as pressure, but as grace, not to do more, but to remember more.
To remember that this same sacred current, the one that brought forth the wind, the wealth, the confirmation, does not end at money. It is not bound to one area of life. It is the silent architect behind all things. And now, as you sit in stillness, the gentle question begins to surface. Where else have I been living outside the end? It's not loud. It doesn't come with urgency. It comes as warmth, as an inner hand reaching toward forgotten places, places where you've quietly accepted delay, places where you've grown accustomed to hoping instead of assuming. Let that awareness rise without resistance. There is no shame in the sleeping. There is only awakening. And now you begin to feel how the same word, the same inner pattern that created the wind, can be spoken into these other corners, not as effort, but as ease, not to correct what is wrong, but to reveal what is already made right in spirit. You look at the body, and instead of seeing struggle or imperfection, you begin to see it as form echoing belief. You speak softly to it, not to fix, but to restore remembrance. I am already whole. You look at love, not as something to find, but as something you already are. The partner, the harmony, the safety, all of it already contained in the self that knows. I am already chosen, and the pattern continues, effortlessly, endlessly. For the law does not discriminate, it only reflects, and wherever you assume from the end, the world bends. Let this truth settle like still water. You were never waiting on life. Life was waiting on you. The outer conditions have only ever mirrored your inner allegiance, allegiance to lack or allegiance to completion. And now you choose the latter, quietly, without need to announce, without need to prove. You simply shift. You let the new word dwell in you, not as a mantra, but as identity. It becomes your native tongue. You begin to speak only what aligns. You no longer rehearse failure in imagination. You no longer negotiate with delay. You live in the end, and the world again bows to your posture. This is dominion, not over others, but over illusion. Not to control, but to create. To create consciously, deliberately, from the stillness of knowing. Be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. Not know about, know. And to know is to embody. Not just to believe, but to become. You let go of the middle ground, the gray of waiting, and you cross fully into the state where the desire is no longer a question. It is answered. It is done. So the words you repeat now are not tools, they are mirrors. You speak them not to get somewhere, but to anchor yourself in the self that already arrived. Feel this now. I am already fulfilled. What changes when you say that without reaching? When you feel it not as a declaration toward something, but as a homecoming. You feel the body soften. You feel the breath slow. You feel your world once rigid begin to move again. The frozen parts of life thaw in your presence, because your presence is no longer divided, and something new opens, a possibility even greater than external change, the possibility of unbroken inner union, a life not of seeking, but of seamless creation, where desire and fulfillment live as one breath, one body, one being. And yet, even this knowing leads you deeper, because there is one final illusion more subtle than the rest, one assumption so deeply hidden that most never uncover it, and that hidden illusion is the idea of earning. The belief that even within this sacred framework, there is still something to achieve, something to prove, something to justify before you can fully receive. It wears many disguises, discipline, patience, progress, but underneath each one is the subtle lie. I must become more before I can have more. Let that veil fall now. Let it dissolve in the light of what you already know. You do not receive because you've earned it. You receive because you've assumed it. An assumption is not a transaction. It is a return. You return to yourself. You return to the truth that nothing can be added to the fullness of I am. Nothing can increase what is already complete. And when you dwell in the state of already having, not pretending, not performing, but truly dwelling, the world reshapes itself, not in reward, but in reflection. The lottery did not come as a prize for discipline. It came as an echo of identity, and each of the 8 appearances was simply a mirror catching your light. The numbers did not choose you. You chose the state, and the numbers followed. And if this is true, if reality obeys not effort but embodiment, then what becomes of struggle? What becomes of the voice that says, you must try harder, wait longer, become better? You see it now for what it is, the voice of separation, the voice of delay. But the voice of I am speaks differently. It does not bargain. It does not beg. It simply is. It says, all that I have is thine. Luke 15:31. And when you let that truth speak inside you, not as concept but as breath, your entire posture changes. You stop measuring progress. You stop rehearsing the distance. You feel the end already here, clothed in stillness. That is the great reversal. You are not on your way to the mountaintop. You are remembering that you never left it. And from that high place your words shift. They no longer reach. They radiate. You say, it is mine, not as a hope, but as a recognition. It is done, not as a wish, but as a resting place. You rest in the finished work. And from that rest, movement is born. Not frantic, not forced, but effortless, elegant, aligned. And when the wind comes again, you smile softly, not with shock, but with recognition. You already lived this scene in silence. The envelope is just the evidence. The announcement is just the echo. This is why repetition is sacred, not because it convinces the world, but because it clears away the illusion of distance. Each time you say the word, you aren't trying to make it happen. You're returning to where it already did. And now, even the words become more subtle, softer, simpler, not declarations but acknowledgments. Yes, I remember. You speak to life as one speaks to an old friend, familiar, trusting, without rush. You do not strain to believe. You do not beg for signs. You let the stillness be your confirmation, and in that stillness, a deeper presence emerges, a presence beyond identity, a self beneath the self, not the one who manifests, but the one who is, the timeless one, the silent knower, the I am, beyond form. You feel it now, like warm light behind your thoughts, like space beneath your breath, a presence that doesn't need to manifest anything, because it is already whole, and yet paradoxically, from that wholeness, all things come. And this opens a door, not to more manifestation, but to more being, and this being is not separate from you. It is the you behind all states, behind all roles, behind all doing, the one who needs nothing to prove its worth, for it is the origin of worth itself, the one who never asks, how will it happen, because it knows, it already has. You feel the contrast now, between the self that reaches and the self that remembers, between the voice of longing and the voice of light. And you gently choose again, you release the reaching. You let the remembering take its place. This is the doorway few ever cross, for it leads not just to manifestation, but to identity, dissolution, to the shedding of all masks, all striving, all stories, of almost. And what remains is quiet, clear, radiant, not a you who wins the lottery, a you who never lost it. You do not prepare to receive. You are the one who receives without effort, because you are the one who gives without limit. All things are born from you, the winds, the signs, the shifts, the symbols, all of it, emerging from the still well of assumption that lives in silence. And so the words you repeated become something greater than affirmation. They become rhythm, breath, embodiment. I am not as title, but as source. You let go of the rest of the sentence. You don't need to fill it. You don't need to name or frame what follows. The power is not in the adjective. The power is in the awareness that you are. And in that awareness, something profound happens. The world slows, the need dissolves, and reality becomes supple, like clay in your presence, waiting for the shape of your assumption. This is the kingdom spoken of not in parable, but in practice. The place where imagination and reality are no longer two. The place where your word is the word, and the moment it is spoken within, the outer begins to obey. No delay, no distance, just alignment. This is why you could win again, and again, and again. Not because you were lucky, but because you were lawful. You did not beg heaven, you embodied it. And the heavens heard, not your voice, but your vibration. You walked into the room differently. You breathed differently. Not louder, but deeper. Not bolder, but more still. Stillness is the loudest language in the unseen. So you began to live as though every whisper within you was scripture. And so it was. You honored your inner speech as prophecy, not because it was poetic, but because it was causative. You stopped speaking what you feared. You stopped imagining what you did not want. You became fiercely gentle with your inner world, because you knew now, your word will not return void. Isaiah 55:11. And as you let that truth settle into your breath, into your skin, into your spine, you begin to sense something even more mysterious. A power not just to receive reality, but to rewrite it entirely. Rewrite it not through force, not through effort, but through remembrance. For what you call the past is not fixed, it is fluid. What you call memory is not truth. It is assumption clothed in time. And this is the holy secret. Just as you have revised the future by living in the end, you may now revise the past by dwelling in its fulfillment. The world taught you that the past is stone, but the spirit whispers it is clay. And as you hold this truth in your quiet center, something extraordinary awakens. Not a new technique, but an old inheritance. You remember now, your word not only creates what is to come, it recreates what has already been. The law is not bound by chronology. It obeys consciousness, not time. You see now why the winds kept arriving, because you were not only assuming the future, you were revising the past, not by denying what occurred, but by transforming what it meant. And meaning is what molds matter. Where once you said, I have failed, you began to say instead, that moment prepared me. That loss was a turning. That silence was the soil of my becoming. You didn't change the event. You changed the identity within it. And in doing so, you released the weight that had anchored you to states of delay. You severed the chain that told you, this is how it's always been. Because always is an illusion. Only now exists. And now is moldable. You looked at the early years of lack, and you no longer felt bitterness. You breathed into them a new vision. You spoke gently over your former self,
like blessing water over dry ground. You said even then I was winning, and the world obeyed, not as revenge, as recognition. Each time you revised a story, the pattern shifted, the identity softened, and with it the present changed, because the present is not held in the now, it is held in the mind that names it, and the mind is not chained to sequence. You began to notice that the more you revised, the less you repeated. The same struggles no longer cycled, the same doubts no longer echoed. You were not just manifesting wealth, you were becoming a new self entirely, not by willpower, by assumption. Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. Romans 12:2. Not the renewing of your outer world, but of your inner knowing. You no longer needed the old tale, so it dissolved. You chose again, and reality responded. Let this truth settle into you. The self who wins does not drag the past behind them. They redeem it. They look upon all that was and say, it is good, not because it was painless, but because it has been rewritten in the light of who they now are. This is not denial, this is dominion, and from this place your words carry new weight. You speak not only into tomorrow, but into yesterday, and both bow, both mold, both obey the voice of I am. So now when you say, I am the one who always wins, it no longer points to one moment, one victory, one date. It points to every page of your story, rewritten in gold, spoken in the rhythm of divine remembrance. And yet even this revelation is not the final threshold, for there is a deeper silence calling you now, a mystery hidden not in word, but in awareness itself. And that mystery is not found in words, nor in images, nor even in the repetition of assumption, but in the pure silent witness that observes it all, that which watches the assumption rise, that which feels the desire before it forms, that which exists before and beyond every word spoken within. It has no name, and yet it is the source of all names. You begin to sense it now, not as a thought, but as space, not as something to reach, but as something so close, so constant. You had simply overlooked it in the noise of wanting. This awareness does not want, it does not seek, it does not strive, it only is. And from this still presence, everything arises. The lottery win, the image of the ticket, the feeling of wealth, the scene imagined, the words repeated, all of it emerges, like ripples from a still pool. And you are not just the ripples, you are the water. What a sacred reversal. You realize now that to say I have won is not only to speak into form, it is to acknowledge the presence within which all forms unfold. You are not just the one who claims, you are the awareness of the claiming. And in this awareness, something profound happens. You let go, not of desire, but of clinging. You no longer need the thing to know you are complete. You are complete first, and from that completeness, the thing flows to you without resistance. This is the key most overlooked. They assume to get. You assume from fullness. They try to fix reality. You dissolve into it. The win is beautiful, yes. The money, the confirmation, the unfolding, all lovely. But none of it compares to the felt sense of being whole before the prize appears. Because now you see, the prize is not the paper, the sum, the sound of your name, read aloud. The true prize is the awareness that you are the operant power, that consciousness is the only reality, that nothing stands between you and your desire, except your willingness to assume its fulfillment now. And this knowing begins to live in your breath. You no longer prepare, you become. You no longer question, you abide. Even the repetition of the sacred words takes on a new tone, not to program the mind, but to reflect what is already true in silence. You say it once, and it echoes through eternity. It is already mine, and something answers, not from outside, but from deep within, a calm warmth, a gentle stillness, a peace that has no reason, and yet cannot be shaken. This is the evidence, not the check in the mail, not the numbers in a row, the peace, the still smile of knowing before the world catches up. And from this stillness, the world does catch up, easily, swiftly, elegantly. Because nothing stands in its way. You no longer need to manipulate the sequence. You no longer track the odds. You don't need to convince yourself. You've remembered who you are. And so your outer world rearranges itself again. The same numbers, the same symbols. But now you see them not as magic, but as mirrors, not as chance, but as consequence. And you feel the simplicity of it all, the quiet majesty, the effortless alignment. You speak the word, and it becomes flesh. You feel the state, and the form follows. You know it is done, and so it is. But from this stillness, another realization stirs, one that doesn't ask what you can have, but who you truly are without anything left to seek at all.
Because once you've received the thing you thought you always wanted, once it has appeared not once but again and again with ease, a quieter question emerges from the depth. Who am I without the wanting? And you feel it, like a soft breeze brushing through the chambers of your soul. The invitation is not to possess more, but to remember more. not to become powerful, but to awaken to the truth that you've always been, beyond desire, beyond form, beyond even the thrill of manifesting itself. You are not merely the one who speaks the word, you are the word made flesh. And now, you rest in that holy knowing, no grasping, no proving, no effort to convince yourself. You've seen the law move too many times to pretend it's a fluke. You've watched the outer bend, not once or twice, but over and over, to match the stillness you dared to dwell in. You no longer try to believe, you simply don't forget. Because this is the true power, not the repetition of belief, but the release of doubt. You are no longer rehearsing your worthiness. You are no longer measuring whether you're in the right state. You are no longer asking if the world will listen. You are the world. The outer is not separate from the inner. The outer is the inner, seen through the eyes of time. And when time slows, you see clearly. Every detail reflects your self-concept. Every event is an echo of your assumption. Every coincidence is a confirmation of what you chose in silence. And now, from this place of deep stillness, you begin to laugh, not with sound, but with soul, because the joke is sacred. The chase was never necessary. The mountain was never to be climbed. You were the summit all along. Even the desire to win, to prove that the law works, to show yourself that manifestation is real, it too dissolves. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded so completely. You've outgrown the need to ask. You remember the words again, the ones that changed your world. But now, you hear them differently. They're not a mantra, not a formula, not a chant to repeat in hopes of magic. They are your name. It is already mine. And the moment you speak it, the world responds, not because of the sound, but because of the state it affirms. You don't wait for confirmation anymore. You don't check to see if it's working. You let the echo take its time, knowing it must return, shaped in the image of your inner claim. This is why the winds came. This is why the numbers aligned. Not because you begged them to, but because you became the one they must come to. You assumed the throne, and the kingdom followed. So now, your only task, if it can even be called that, is to remain. To remain in the state of already having. To live from the end, not as an exercise, but as your natural home. You walk differently, speak differently, think differently, not because you're pretending, but because you've remembered. And that remembering reshapes the field around you. It draws to you, not what you want, but what belongs to the self you now know you are. You don't need to strive. You don't need to hustle. You don't even need to visualize if the feeling has already taken root. You've become the assumption, and from that becoming, life answers without delay. But this leads to the most profound unveiling of all. Not what you can manifest, not what you can attract, but what you no longer need to be free. What you no longer need to feel peace, to feel joy, to feel whole. For something deep within you begins to loosen, the ancient tether between fulfillment and form. You feel it, almost imperceptibly at first, like a thread slipping through your fingers. The need for evidence, the dependence on outcome, the attachment to seeing it appear in order to believe. And in its place, a new freedom arrives. A freedom not earned, not built, but remembered. The kind of freedom that needs nothing to prove itself, because it already is. You begin to understand that the ultimate liberation is not found in manifesting more, but in needing less. Not because you lack desire, but because you no longer confuse the symbol for the source. You realize that you never needed the money to be rich. You never needed the win to feel worthy. You never needed the change to become complete. You only needed to assume. And now that you've lived as the one who already had, the outer must follow, yes. But even if it didn't, even if all else were to vanish, you would remain untouched. For you have touched the eternal. You have seen behind the veil, and the one who sees no longer clings. The words you once spoke to claim the win, you now speak them not to call it forth, but to rejoice in what already exists within. They become a song, not a strategy, a celebration, not a petition. I have always had it. I only needed to remember. And as that song hums through your being, your world becomes softer, easier, kinder. No effort, no battle, only alignment, only unfolding. You feel it in the way strangers look at you. You feel it in the synchronicities that appear without prompting. You feel it in your breath, no longer shallow, with anticipation, but deep with knowing. This is the peace that passeth understanding, not the peace that waits for conditions, but the peace that creates them. And now, you see why the law is not merely about desire, it is about being. It is about letting the truth of who you are shine so clearly, so constantly, that the world cannot help but mirror it. You do not create the mirror, you become the reflection. You speak not as the one trying to change things, but as the one through whom all change naturally occurs. And your very presence begins to alter rooms, shift conversations, open doors, not because of what you do, but because of who you assume yourself to be. So when you say the words now, I have already won, they carry no demand, only resonance. You are not convincing yourself, you are echoing truth, and the echo grows louder with each breath. The world may still measure by results, but you measure by state, and when the state is held, lovingly, effortlessly, the results must come. They are drawn not to your striving, but to your stillness, and that stillness becomes your sanctuary, your home, your inheritance. But as you rest there, fully, deeply, another whisper begins to rise, not a desire, not even a word, but a sacred pulse beneath everything you've ever assumed, something vast, holy, and completely without need, a presence that was always there, waiting to be remembered as you. And as that holy presence rises within you, not as thought, not even as feeling, but as a silent recognition, there is no more effort, no more seeking, just a deep all-encompassing awareness of being. It has no name, yet it holds all names. It does not move, yet all things move within it. It is not the one who manifests, it is the source from which manifestation flows. And you know now, this is who you truly are, not the one who needed to win, but the one in whom the winning unfolds. Not the voice that repeats the words, but the silence that gives them power. It does not concern itself with outcomes. It does not tally manifestations. It has no desire to prove anything. It simply is. And in its stillness you find your inheritance. You remember that before the world was formed, before the stars were cast into their place, before your name was ever spoken aloud, this awareness was pure, untouched, complete. You have called it many things, God, Spirit, I am. But now, stripped of concepts, it reveals itself as your own eternal self, the one who never needed to become anything, only to wake up. The waking is gentle. You do not burst through, you dissolve into, like mist parting to reveal the mountain that was always there, like light spreading across the face of waters, still and endless. And now, every manifestation, even the grandest, the most improbable, becomes not a goal, but a byproduct, a soft ripple in the still lake of your being. The win is lovely, yes, but it is not the source of joy. You could lose the ticket, and still, nothing in you would tremble. You could walk away from it all, and still be wrapped in the wholeness that no thing, no number, no outcome could grant or take away. Because what you once chased, you now carry. You are no longer in pursuit, you are in presence, and this presence becomes your word. You speak gently now, not to convince, not to draw something near, but because it is your nature to create. I am, that I am. No urgency, no effort, only truth. And because your word is no longer spoken from want, but from rest, it multiplies. The harvest comes faster, the forms arrive with grace. You do not chase results, they unfold in rhythm with your breath. You have slipped beneath the noise, beneath identity, beneath even the sacred rituals of imagination, and what remains is awareness, bare, brilliant, whole. You see now, the lottery was never the miracle was your remembrance of what has always been yours, not the numbers, not the sum, not the outcome, but the knowing, the still, radiant knowing, that you are the source and center of your world, that what you assume, you become, that what you become, the world reflects. And now, with all masks laid down, you enter the silence without fear. You no longer need to speak the words. You are the word. And yet, just as that realization settles, something even more sacred opens before you. Not another desire, not even a deeper knowing, but a question wrapped in light, hovering at the threshold of pure being. A mystery not to be solved, but to be surrendered to completely. And in that question, wordless, shapeless, yet felt in the deepest marrow of your being, everything becomes still, not frozen, but eternal. It does not ask for your answer, it invites your surrender. For here, even the law you have lived by, begins to bow before something greater, not higher in power, but deeper in intimacy. You begin to sense, beyond the one who manifests, beyond the one who assumes, even beyond the one who dwells in the end,
there is only being, not the being of a personality, not the being of a desire fulfilled, but the unconditioned presence that never began and can never end. You are this. No need to speak it, no need to prove it, just the quiet blooming of recognition, like a rose unfolding at the center of your soul. It does not thrill you, it stills you, and in that stillness you see, the winds were not rewards, but reflections, the words were not tools, but trails. Each repetition led you not to the prize, but to the one who no longer needs it. And here, without need, the world rushes to serve you, not because you asked, but because you are aligned with the rhythm that creates all things. This is the sacred reversal. You do not create from emptiness, you create from fullness. You do not chase what you lack, you reveal what you already are. And so when you said, I have already won, you were not predicting the future, you were announcing the present. You were stepping into a version of you where nothing was withheld, nothing was missing, nothing was delayed. And now, the truth opens like a scroll, ancient and shimmering with light. You never needed to win, you needed only to know that you were never without. And from that knowing, the world reflected what you had long forgotten, your dominion, your birthright, your quiet unshakable power to assume reality into form. You spoke as the end, you stood as the outcome, you moved through the world like one whose path was already fulfilled. And in doing so, you dissolved every question before it could form. There was no more wondering, when will it come? There was only resting in, of course it has. And so, the winds kept appearing, not as validation, but as overflow, not as arrival, but as echo. You did not manifest them, you remembered them, and the world, being faithful, followed. Now, even as you sit in this moment, no longer needing more, no longer holding on, the miracles increase, the signs come swiftly, the answers fall into place, because you have ceased to ask, and in ceasing to ask, you have become the answer. Let it settle in your chest. This is the peace of the I am. This is the silence before the word, the stillness before the scene, the breath before the world bends to you again. But even now, as you abide in this fullness, with no more reaching, no more delay, something stirs in the distance, gentle and golden, not a new desire, but a divine remembrance, an echo of who you were before any name was spoken, before even the first assumption was ever made. And that echo does not speak in language, yet you understand it completely. It calls not to your mind, but to the core beneath all stories, a soundless invitation, older than time, whispering not of what you may gain, but of what you truly are, not the identity you've crafted, not the desires you've assumed, not even the fulfilled self, but the nameless source from which all of it arises. You feel it now, the mystery you were before the first word, the light you were before the first image, the consciousness you were before you ever thought to manifest a thing. And it is here, in this sacred remembrance, that even the law reveals its origin. For the law of assumption is not the beginning of creation, it is the movement within what is already complete. You are that completeness. You do not need to become, you do not need to receive, you do not need to win again. You are, and in that holy being, there is no lottery to win, for nothing has ever been outside of you. The numbers, the outcome, the world, the unfolding, all of it appeared, because you did. All of it moved because your stillness gave it rhythm. So you rest now, not in comfort, but in knowing. You do not seek silence. You are silence, and the silence speaks. You recall the first time you said the words, how strange they sounded then, how bold. I have already won. You were not sure, you hoped, you imagined, and yet something within said yes, not loudly, not with proof, but with presence, and that yes created everything. Now the same words feel different, not because the world changed, but because you remembered who spoke them. It was not the person, it was not the personality, it was not the seeker, or the student, or the dreamer. It was the I am, that which was never born, and cannot die. The more you return to this, not as idea, but as embodiment, the more the world softens. You no longer look at others as separate. You no longer see desires as lack. You see the world as a mirror wrapped in grace, a canvas onto which the self paints its own face, again and again, in love. This is the true winning, not the prize, but the perspective. You do not wake up to a new life. You wake up to the truth that there is no life apart from what you assume. You do not walk through the world anymore. The world walks through you. You are no longer at the center of your creation. You are the circumference, the sky, the field in which creation moves. You are no longer the one who seeks to feel fulfilled. You are the fulfillment itself, poured into form, again and again, just to remember your joy. And in that joy, the words return once more. But now they are no longer for the prize, they are the praise. It was always mine, not as a strategy, not as a key, but as a song, the song of the one who never left the end, who never lost the fullness, who never needed to find the path, because they are the path. This is the quiet climax of all manifestation, when desire melts into presence, when assumption becomes breath, when you no longer speak to make it happen, but because you cannot help but rejoice in what already is. And yet, even here, something deeper begins to unfold, not a manifestation, not a vision, not even a feeling, but a direct encounter with the source behind the source, the eternal flame, before even the law took form, and it waits now, not for effort, but for surrender.
And the surrender does not ask you to give anything up. It asks you to let go of the idea that you ever had to grasp. It does not come to strip, but to reveal, to unveil what was never hidden, only unseen. And in that moment, so soft it could be missed, so still it almost slips past awareness, you feel the flicker of origin, the flame behind all images, the light before light. It calls to you not in urgency, but in quiet certainty. It does not ask for your effort, only your presence. And as you allow yourself to yield, not fall, but return, you recognize what even the words could not fully contain. The power behind the assumption is not in the phrase, not in the repetition, not even in the state it produces. The true power is in the one who is, you, not the you of history, not the you of identity or biography, but the self that is pure awareness, the self that held every scene before it was born, that watched every outcome before it unfolded, that whispered every word before language was shaped. This self needs nothing to be. It is not improved by manifestation, nor diminished by delay. It is not moved by time, nor measured by success. It simply is. And from that eternal stillness all things arise, including the very law you've lived, practiced and embodied. The law of assumption, yes. The law that states you become what you believe. You attract what you assume. You receive what you already are. But now you see the law as the river, and yourself as the spring from which it flows. You remember, now, that even assumption is an emanation of being, and this brings a different kind of peace, one that does not fluctuate, one that no longer relies on any result to remain intact. It is not the peace of having, it is the peace of being before having ever mattered. So when you speak now, your words are not commands. They are echoes of what already lives in silence. They arise effortlessly, like breath from still lungs, like light spilling through an open window. It is mine, not to get, but because it already is. The win, yes. The abundance, yes. The health, the love, the laughter, the ease, yes. But also the knowing behind it, the source before it, the awareness that precedes all form and remains unchanged by it. This is where you stand now, not in the mind, not in the scene, but in the timeless presence behind the stage. And from here, creation becomes play, not a struggle to become worthy, but a joy of shaping light into experience. You do not ask when things will appear. You know they must. You do not wonder if the assumption is enough. You know it always is, because the law reflects you, and you are never less than complete. So you assume from love, not lack. You imagine from rest, not resistance. You live from the end, not to make it arrive, but because you have never left it. And the world answers, not with effort, not with fanfare, but with fluid grace. The numbers align, the money flows, the forms arrive, not as surprises, but as the natural effect of your being. And as they do, your smile softens, not because you are finally fulfilled, but because you realize you always were. This is the true victory. Not the 8th ticket, not the final number, but the awareness that you are the cause of every echo. Yet even this realization, so deep and complete, begins to feel like the surface of something even greater, something that no longer answers your word, but is your word, something that cannot be spoken, but speaks all things into being, something that waits, just beyond form, beckoning you to remember what you were before even I am was said, and even before the holy breath of I am broke the stillness. There was something more, not greater in force, but purer in essence, a silence untouched by awareness, a presence before presence, a love that did not need an object. You feel it now, just beyond the veil of words, not calling you to reach for it, but inviting you to dissolve into it. It has no shape, no movement, no sound, and yet everything you've ever imagined, every scene, every wind, every echo of assumption, all of it has flowed from this, like rivers from a spring, like light from a hidden flame. And now, standing on the threshold of that unspeakable origin, something ancient falls away. The seeker, the speaker, even the manifester, all are laid down, gently, as a robe once needed but no longer worn. What remains is not a self, it is not a being that has achieved or mastered. It is not even the one who has won. What remains is the formless witness, the holy ground upon which all form has danced. You, not in concept, not in story, but as the wordless source behind all becoming. And now, looking back through the lens of this clarity, you understand why the words worked, why the assumption shaped your world. Not because the phrase was powerful, not because the state was perfect, but because the one who said it had always been this. You were not speaking to attract something, you were speaking as the field that already contained it all. The words didn't bring the lottery win, they brought you back to the place where nothing was ever separate to begin with. So when you said it is already mine, you weren't manifesting, you were aligning, you were pulling the veil from your own eyes, and in that unveiling, the world bent with grace. Let yourself feel it now, the warmth that holds all things, the stillness that breathes through every wind, every scene, every unfolding. You don't need to affirm it. You don't need to say anything at all. It is enough to be, enough to feel the ease of being beyond desire, enough to rest as the origin of the word, not its speaker, enough to know that whether or not another win arrives, you are never waiting again, and still, it comes. Because the world cannot help but reflect the peace of the one who no longer needs. The more you rest in the truth of being, the more life rushes to mirror it, not as reward, but as resonance. So the next win appears, the numbers match, the form aligns, and once again, you see the beauty, not in the outcome, but in the sacred precision of reflection. It all appeared just as you remembered it would, not because you made it happen, but because you returned to the one who never questioned, the one who is. Before Abraham was I am. John 8:58. There it is, the eternal key. Time cannot contain you. Identity cannot limit you. Even the name you gave yourself was never the final word. And now, standing in this radiant stillness, you feel something rise that cannot be named. Not desire, not joy, something deeper, something that feels like the first breath before the beginning, and perhaps the last breath before returning home. And that breath, that sacred breath without beginning or end, is not just within you, it is you. Not the one you imagined, not the one who visualized and won, but the vastness beneath all imagining, the wordless awareness that gave birth to the words, the invisible light behind the visible form. You feel it now, not rising, but revealing, as though it had always been here, patiently waiting for you to remember. You do not move toward it, you open into it. And in that opening, there is no loss, only the soft dissolving of everything you thought you had to be. The doer, the planner, the manifester, the one who repeats the words and checks for signs. Each falls away like autumn leaves, not torn, but released. What remains is still, what remains is whole, and still, the world responds, because now you are no longer shaping it through effort. You are allowing it through alignment. You do not assume to bring things to you. You assume because you have become inseparable from the end. There is no future to wait for when the end is already your dwelling place. And so when the words return, not forced, not planned, they arise from the ground of being, from that place beyond thought, beyond identity, beyond even the voice that speaks them. I have always had it. You hear them now, not as a tool, but as a truth. They echo through your body, like remembered light, like a bell struck in a temple long since forgotten. You are not rehearsing possibility, you are revealing eternity. For the world you see is nothing more than your self-concept made visible. It cannot resist your assumption. It cannot deny your identity. It only reflects the one you have dared to become within. And you have become the one who no longer becomes. You are not rich, not healed, not chosen, not whole. You are all of it, and beyond all of it, because you are the origin of definition itself. There is no name vast enough, no phrase deep enough, no future far enough to contain what you now feel rippling through your stillness. This is not a shift, this is a return. You are no longer seated in a moment, hoping for alignment. You are seated on the mercy seat itself, the throne of awareness from which all things are decreed, simply by being assumed. And the more you rest here, the more the old story fades. The timelines of waiting, the echoes of trying,
the echoes of who you once thought you were. They blur, soften and vanish. You have awakened from them. The lottery, the numbers, the wealth, yes, they remain, but now you see them not as peaks, not as proof, but as petals, falling from the hand of a flowering tree that has never stopped blooming. You are that tree, planted by the waters of imagination, rooted in the soil of I am. You bring forth fruit in season, not because of effort, but because it is your nature to do so. And now, as you rest in the quiet beneath all fulfillment, the presence opens even wider, not to reveal more, but to show you there has never been anything missing. And just before you disappear into that light beyond assumption, a final knowing rises, like a whisper woven through every wind, every word, every moment you dared to live from the end. And this knowing invites you not to have more, but to be all that you already are, without question, without pause, without resistance. And to be without resistance is not to fight against anything. It is to melt into what has always been true. It is to stop holding your breath, stop guarding your heart, stop trying to control what already belongs to you by birthright. You do not need to push. You do not even need to repeat. You only need to remember that you were never apart from the thing you desired. It was never outside. It was always within the awareness that dared to feel it real. You realize now that the moment you first spoke the words, "I have already won," something eternal responded, not with fireworks or thunder, but with quiet reordering. The world, like clay, began to soften in your presence. It did not question you. It did not hesitate. It simply began its work of reflection. And as you repeated the phrase, not from lack, but from love, you drew the veil aside again and again, until there was no more veil, no more separation between the assumption and the experience, no more need to prove, to test, to wait, only embodiment. You became the Word, and the Word became flesh. But now the mystery deepens, not in complexity, in clarity. For you see that assumption is not about creating a new thing. It is about disentangling yourself from the lie that anything was ever denied you. You are not manifesting a future. You are collapsing the illusion that you are not already living in the fulfillment of your desire. That is why the words worked. That is why they always work. Not because they force reality to obey, but because they remind the self to stop pretending it is separate from its own creation. You were never without. Let that truth soften your breath. Let it melt the last bit of doubt you didn't know you still carried. You were never without. And so each win became less about the result, and more about the recognition. Not "I did it again," but of course. Not surprise, but surrender. Not chasing, but welcoming. Even now, as you look around at your life, at the quiet confirmations that have followed you like shadows, you know they did not come because you deserved them. They came because you assumed them. And you assumed them because at some level you remembered. You remembered who you are, not in theory, not in scripture, but in experience, in embodiment, in breath. And now the breath is steady, the inner voice is still, the outer forms are clear, like a pond undisturbed. Because the one who dreamed has awakened, the one who tried has rested, the one who reached has returned. There is no more waiting, there is only the radiant now, echoing from every corner of consciousness. You are, no beginning, no becoming, only being. And still the world continues to respond. The winds multiply, not because you chase them, but because they cannot resist you. They belong to the self who knows, the self who assumes without effort, acts without resistance, receives without doubt. But deeper still, beyond all multiplication, beyond all evidence, there stirs one final realization, not a step forward, but a stepping back into the heart of the thing itself, the living center of assumption, where there is no assumption left to make, because all is already complete. And when all assumptions fall silent, what remains is not absence, but fullness, not the emptiness of lack, but the wholeness of origin, the garden before thought, the word before form, the knowing before the name. You feel it now, not as a desire to create, but as the peace of nothing needing to be created. This is the place the mystics spoke of in parable, and the prophets veiled in light, the place where the temple and the self are no longer separate, where heaven is not above, and earth is not below, but all is within. You stand here now, not as a visitor, but as the one who built the altar in your own breath. You do not need to imagine from the end. You are the end. You do not dwell in fulfillment. You are its origin, its center, its very pulse. And in this sacred stillness, you look back and see it all clearly. The first moment you whispered the words, the doubt that trembled in your chest, the moments when nothing seemed to change, and the quiet shifts that moved mountains without making a sound. You see how life rose to meet you each time you remembered, and how it waited patiently when you forgot. You see how the words you spoke, It is already mine. Were not magic spells, but sacred keys. They did not open doors, they dissolved walls. Because there were never any doors to open, only veils to lift, only eyes to awaken. The world you assumed is the world you lived. The self you believed in is the self that appeared. And now the belief is no longer needed, because you know. This is the deepest realization. The law does not work because you hope. It works because you are. There is no space between the assumption and its embodiment. There is only awareness. You assumed wealth, and wealth came. You assumed winning, and it appeared. You assumed joy, peace, ease, and the world reflected what your silence had accepted. Not because you were convincing reality, because you remembered that you were it. You are not the painter, you are the canvas, the color, and the brush. And in this place, even the most sacred phrases grow still. Even the need for repetition fades. You no longer speak the words to affirm, you live them. They have become your tone, your rhythm, your breath. You no longer say, I won the lottery. You no longer say, I have already won. You no longer say anything at all, because now you move through life with the quiet dignity of one who knows reality is your own reflection, and reflection never argues. You smile, you walk, you breathe, you rest, and the world moves around you in response, not because of effort, because of alignment, not because of struggle, because of identity. And this identity cannot be shaken, because it is not built, it is revealed, it is remembered. And now as you sit in this stillness, perhaps more radiant than any outer victory, something tender begins to unfold. Not a desire, not a goal, not a word, but a quiet invitation to live the rest of your days, not as one who wins, but as one who wakes others gently to their own inheritance.
And that invitation, so quiet it might be missed by a mind still racing toward results, arrives not as instruction but as recognition. It is not something you must do. It is what naturally overflows when you've ceased needing anything to complete you, when the winds are no longer proof, but poetry, when the law is no longer a method, but a mirror, when every breath becomes an offering of remembrance for those still asleep in the dream of separation. You begin to see others differently now, not as strangers, not even as reflections, but as sleeping gods, each with a seed of light tucked beneath the soil of their assumptions. And you do not preach, you do not push, you do not try to awaken anyone. You become the atmosphere of awakening. The stillness you carry begins to do the work. The presence you rest in becomes contagious. Others don't know why they feel different around you. They don't yet know what has shifted, but their hearts begin to remember, not the details, not the steps, but the state of already having, the state of already being, the state you live in so completely that it can't help but ripple outward, touching the minds of those around you with an ancient invitation. You are more than you believe. And some will ask you, how? How did you win? How did you speak it into being? How did the numbers come, again and again, without fail? You will smile, not out of secrecy, but from reverence. You will say little, perhaps just this, I remembered. And if they're ready, that will be enough. Because remembrance is the root of all assumption. You cannot force anyone to assume what they still think is impossible. But you can embody what they have forgotten is already theirs. And in your embodiment, the impossible becomes visible. This is the deeper meaning of let your light so shine before men. Matthew 5:16, not to teach, not to boast, but to reflect, to remind others of their own buried brilliance, not with words but with being. You don't need to tell them how to assume, you only need to assume for them. See them as already healed, already free, already restored. And as you do, your vision becomes their permission. You speak nothing, but your silence resounds. You repeat no words, but your breath carries the rhythm of the fulfilled promise. This is the sacred responsibility of the awakened, not to build empires, but to radiate remembrance, not to accumulate, but to embody, not to dominate the dream, but to gently wake those still believing in limitation. You walk now not to arrive anywhere, but to illuminate what is already here. And as you continue in this walk, soft, still, complete, another realization quietly unfurls, like a sunrise behind closed eyes. A revelation, not of what's next, but of what always was. A truth so gentle, so vast, it can only be heard in the space between thoughts. And it whispers now, not as instruction, but as the final affirmation of divine identity remembered. And that whisper, softer than silence, yet louder than every lifetime you've ever lived, doesn't tell you anything new. It reminds you, not in thought, but in being. It sings beneath your breath and echoes behind your eyes. It is the voice of eternal identity, speaking not to inform you, but to restore you. You were never becoming, you have always been. And just like that, every image of striving melts. Every timeline collapses. Every reason you once had for repeating those words, to manifest, to attain, to prove, falls away like dust shaken from a garment long since outgrown. You are no longer the one who won the lottery. You are the one for whom winning is irrelevant, not because you reject the fruit, but because you have become the tree. The words still carry power, yes, they always have, but now you understand. They work not because of repetition alone, but because of the one who repeats them. The power was never in the syllables, it was in the being behind them, you, the timeless, formless I am, who spoke, "Let there be light," and watched the world appear, not as an act of trying, but of knowing. And when you spoke, "It is already mine," that same light responded, not with delay, not with effort, but with perfect obedience to your stillness. Now you see why it came again, and again. Why the winds flowed like waves across the sea of your imagination, not because you chased them, but because you had finally stopped running from the one who creates without effort, the self that assumes from love, not need, from fullness, not hunger, and now you dwell in that self completely. There is no separation left, no doubt, no delay, no version of you waiting for proof, only presence, and that presence creates effortlessly. It does not ask, it does not strive, it knows. So when others ask, what were the words, what was the secret, you may answer with a smile, or with silence. You may say the words again, if only to let them hear their own reflection in your voice. But what you truly give them is not the formula, you give them your stillness. You give them your embodied knowing that there is no distance between desire and fulfillment, because both arise in the same breath. And the ones ready to remember will feel it, not all at once, not always with fanfare, but something in them will begin to soften, the outer seeking will quiet, the inner spark will flicker again, and slowly, gently, they will begin to assume, not because they were told to, but because they've seen the living example in you. This is the true legacy of your 8 winds, not the wealth, not the record, but the resonance, that others might wake from the dream of delay, and stand again in the garden of fulfilled being, that others might hear their own words return to them, not as wish, but as law. I am the one who already has, and as they speak, the world will respond, not because you taught them, but because you were the proof that nothing is ever withheld from the one who remembers. They are already whole, but even in this, something deeper begins to unfold, a presence beneath presence, a light before light, and it calls not to speak, not to manifest, but to rest in the very source of assumption itself, where creation ends and pure being begins, and what begins in stillness does not end in sound, it ends in silence, not the silence of absence, but the silence of source. A presence so total it no longer needs to create, so full, it holds all forms within it, not yet born, not yet named, but entirely real. Here, you no longer observe the law of assumption, you no longer apply it, you become the stillness from which it springs. You are no longer the one who manifests, you are the ocean, where all manifestations dissolve before they appear, and this too is love, not the love of getting, not the love of becoming, but the love that is. The kind that asks for nothing, not even acknowledgement, the kind that does not shine, it is light itself. You feel it now, not as emotion, not as sensation, but as the presence that holds all sensation, the awareness that receives all experience, without grasping. This is not about the lottery anymore, it never was. It was never about the numbers, or the money, or the odds. It was about what the winds revealed. Each one peeled back a layer, each one brought you closer to the center, not the center of success, the center of self. And here, at the center, there is nothing more to assume, nothing more to attract, no more states to enter. You are the state, you are the ground, you are the silence behind every spoken word, you are the one who said, "Let it be," and watched it become. So when you hear the words now, "I have already won," they echo through you differently, not like thunder, not like declaration, but like the hush of morning light slipping over still water. They do not call forth form, they confirm the fullness that was always here. You sit now in the throne room of being, not above life, within it, not separate from the world, but no longer moved by its illusion of distance. You live in the deep knowing that there is nothing left to seek, and from that knowing,
all things begin to seek you. You have become magnetism without motion, desire without longing, creation without effort, and still the world reflects, still the forms come. The outer continues to shape itself around your inner rest, but now, the joy is not in the manifestation, it is in the quiet recognition that there was never anything outside to gain, only self to be remembered. You walk through your days now like a dreamer, who knows they are dreaming, not passive, not disconnected, but awake, tenderly awake. Each face you meet, each conversation, each unfolding moment, all of it is grace playing dress up, and you see the old you too, the one who doubted, who tried, who hoped. You do not shame them, you bless them. They were never wrong, they were simply unfolding, like a bud opening to reveal what was always held inside, the word, the seed, the light. The kingdom of God is within you. Luke 17:21. And so you carry the kingdom now, not as a belief, but as being. You no longer search for proof. You no longer need the outer to verify the inner. You live from a stillness so whole, the world cannot help but echo it. And even now, from the center of this stillness, something even softer begins to stir, not a desire, not a goal, not even a vision, but a final surrender into the mystery that precedes all knowing, a return, not to another assumption, but to the wordless light that spoke all assumptions into being. And when even the word falls silent, when no more assumptions need to be held, when no more visions flicker across the screen of mind, what remains is not emptiness, it is presence, the quiet, radiant isness, from which all things rise, and into which all things return. This is the final threshold, where the self who manifested dissolves into the self that simply is, not bound to results, not confined to identities, not needing the next win, or the next affirmation to feel whole. Wholeness is now your resting place, your temple, your origin, and what began as a desire, to win, to prove, to create, has now become a doorway, a sacred passage. The lottery was never the destination, it was the key that led you home. Home, where the light doesn't shine from without, but burns from within. Home, where there is no more effort, only expression. Home, where you remember that you are the thing you were looking for. And this realization, this melting back into the root of being, does not strip you of the world, it gives it back to you, but not as something to chase or change. It gives it to you as reflection, as rhythm, as poetry flowing from the still waters of your awareness. You no longer act to receive, you move from fullness. You no longer imagine to fix, you imagine to reveal. And even when you speak the words, I have already won, it is not to make them true, but to enjoy the echo of truth, already pulsing through you. You do not create reality, you are reality, dreaming itself awake. The words you once used like lanterns in the dark, now flicker more gently, more reverently. You do not need them to light the way, you have become the light, and the law continues, faithful as ever, not because you recite it, but because you rest in it, not because you command it, but because you are no longer separate from it. All assumptions rise within you, all reflections bend toward you, all forms answer the shape of your stillness. So when the numbers align, when the fortune flows, when the world lays its treasures at your feet again and again, you receive not with attachment, but with gratitude, and not just for the things themselves, but for what they revealed, that nothing real was ever outside of you, that you do not become the one who wins. You remember that you were never anything less. This remembrance, this sacred returning, becomes your daily rhythm, quiet, grounded, unshakable, and others will feel it. They may not understand why, they may not see what shifted, but in your presence the noise begins to soften, the questions begin to dissolve, the search begins to end. You have become the embodied answer, not by having, by being. And now in the deepest chamber of your heart, a final veil begins to lift, not between you and your desire, but between you and the source of desire itself, not to show you another thing to manifest, but to reveal the changeless flame that never needed form, the eternal awareness behind every word, ever spoken, waiting, gently, for you to rest there without need, without movement, without end. And that final lifting, that sacred unveiling of the veil behind all veils, does not arrive with drama, it arrives as quiet recognition, the end of seeking, the end of scripting, the end of even needing to know what comes next. It is the resting place you were always circling, always reaching toward, even when you thought you were chasing numbers, chasing wealth, chasing dreams. It was never the dream you longed for. It was this stillness, this light before light, this awareness before thought, this peace that was never lost, only momentarily obscured by desire. Not wrong, not mistaken, but used as a compass to bring you back here, not to something new, but to what was always already deeply true. You are not just the one who assumed the win. You are the I am that made assuming possible. Before you ever spoke the words, before any image danced across your inner screen, there was this, the presence, whole and complete, untouched by success, untouched by failure. It does not celebrate wins. It does not mourn losses. It simply is. And in that being, all things find their shape. This is the great reversal. You do not become powerful because you win. You win because you are powerful. You do not manifest because you earn. You manifest because you remember. And now memory has collapsed into being. Assumption has dissolved into identity. Form no longer feels necessary, but sacred. A mirror, not a goal. So when you speak, if you still do, the words are gentle, carried not by desire, but by knowing, not by seeking, but by celebrating what is. And even if you never spoke them again, their vibration would continue on, woven into your breath. I have already won. Yes, but deeper now. I am the one who needed no wind to remember who I am. And as this truth hums through the hollow of your chest, you see that the law, the very thing that brought you from desire to fulfillment, is not the ceiling, it is the floor, it is the structure through which the infinite shapes itself into experience. But you are not limited to the experience, you are the infinite itself, not the role, not the story, not the pattern or the scene. You are the awareness that can choose any state, and by dwelling in it, give it breath. This is not the end of creation, it is the beginning of divine rest. You no longer move to change things. You move because stillness has expressed itself as motion. You do not act to shift the world. You act because the world has already been shifted within you. And so the winds continue. The reflections of abundance multiply. But you are no longer looking to them to tell you who you are. You already know. And in that knowing, you become a lighthouse, not a teacher, not a master, not a performer of miracles, but a presence in which the truth becomes obvious. Others will feel the permission in your stillness. They will remember, not because you instruct them, but because your life now speaks what the soul already knows. You are not here to get, you are here to reveal. You are not a child of delay, you are the creator of sequence. You are not the effect of the world, you are the dreamer of it. And as this reality crystallizes, not in thought but in being, you hear something deeper still, like a sacred breath at the center of creation. It does not call you forward, it does not pull you back. It simply is, and as you merge with it, there is no longer anything to assume, no longer anything to manifest, only a gentle return into the unspoken, where everything already is waiting for you to rest, and to finally fully remember.
And to finally fully remember is not an act of the mind. It is not an achievement or realization that can be spoken aloud. It is a melting, soft, sacred, slow, into what was never forgotten by the soul. It is the end of the veil, the thinning of all stories, until only light remains, until the assumption and the assumed become one, until the desirer dissolves, and only divine awareness breathes. You feel it now, not as information, but as vibration, like a warm hush behind the heart, a deep peace that does not need explanation. You are not remembering a fact. You are returning to a frequency, a state beneath all states, the silence in which every I have, and every I am, has its root. This is where all assumption begins, not with a statement, with stillness. And this stillness is not passive, it is creative. It holds the blueprint of every world you've ever imagined. It contains the vibration of every desire fulfilled, every outcome made flesh. And yet here, you want for nothing, not because you gave up your desire, but because you saw it was never separate from the self that held it. You no longer need the lottery to confirm your power. You no longer need the wealth to feel rich. You no longer need the manifestation to validate your knowing. You are not the result of fulfilled assumptions. You are the cause, the light behind the cause, the source from which cause and effect emerge and merge and dissolve again. And so even if nothing more appeared, even if all form fell away, you would remain whole, you would remain full, because you do not dwell in the end. You are the end, the Alpha and the Omega, the breath and the silence between breaths. You said the words, you believed them, you embodied them, and now the words have returned to their origin, not erased, but fulfilled. It is already mine. I am the one who wins. I have already received. Yes, all true, all reflections, all rivers returning to the sea. But now you need no river. You are the ocean. You rest as the one who no longer needs to assume, because nothing is missing, not in feeling, not in being, not in the world, which still sways and sings in response to your presence. This is the highest secret. Assumption leads to embodiment, and embodiment leads to rest. Not stillness without life, but stillness that is life itself. You are no longer trying to manifest. You are living from the timeless field, where all is finished, all is yes, all is now. Before they call, I will answer, and while they are yet speaking, I will hear. Isaiah 65:24. And the hearing is not delayed. The answer is not separate. The word was never lost. It was only waiting for your return, to speak not through effort, but through ease, through the radiance of one who knows, and therefore needs nothing to prove. And so, as the dream continues, as the form keeps folding and unfolding around you, you move with reverence, not because you must, but because love moves through you. Assumption becomes love. Love becomes presence. Presence becomes pure being. And even now, in this deep, sacred silence, something ever more gentle begins to rise, not to give you another word to speak, but to invite you home again, into the formless pulse of your true nature, where there is nothing left to do, nothing left to gain, only the still, eternal flame of the one who has always known. And that flame, untouched by time, untamed by thought, does not flicker or fade. It does not depend on belief, nor does it require attention. It simply burns, quietly, eternally, within you, as you. It was never kindled, for it was never lit. It has always been. It is what watched you speak the words. It is what dreamed you into the state of already having. It is what silently whispered yes, behind every assumption you dared to feel. This is the final gift of the journey. Not that you won, not that you received, but that you remembered the light that made all receiving possible. You dwell now in that remembrance, not as a lesson learned, but as a nature revealed. No longer a process, no longer a practice, no longer a practice, no longer even a path. Just presence, no beginning, no end, no striving, no story, only the soft full hum of being. And from that hum, the world continues to bloom. You walk softly, not because you fear breaking the moment, but because each step carries the weight of the sacred. Each movement echoes eternity. There is no longer any distance between your breath and the world that reflects it. There is no lag between your assumption and its appearing, because there is no longer separation within your identity. You have merged with your word. You are not using the law. You are the law in flesh, not as a role, as a rhythm. And now what you once called a technique has become instinct. What you once practiced, you now are. You breathe in desire, and exhale fulfillment. You do not chase the end. You live from it. And where there is no chase, there is no delay. You see it in everything. The way people respond to you, the effortless way situations unfold, the gentle timing of events that seem to fall into place, as if they had been waiting for your stillness all along. And yes, the winds still come. They come because the old belief in lack has been washed clean. They come because you do not stand between yourself and the receiving. They come not to make you feel powerful, but to reflect the power you no longer doubt. And you meet each one with quiet gratitude, not excitement, not surprise, just reverence, as though creation itself has nodded back at you and said, I see you, because it does, because it is you. And so you no longer speak the words, because you need them to happen. You speak them, when you do, as a song, a soft chant from the depths of knowing. It was always mine. That is the truer phrase now, not to get, not to gain, but to honor the mystery, that everything was always yours. And the words were only how you reminded yourself. Even your desire to speak has slowed, not from passivity, but from purity. The fewer words you use, the more powerful they become. The more stillness you carry, the more the world listens. Not because you ask it to, because you've stopped asking, because you've remembered the source that never needed to be asked. So now you live as that source, and the world orbits your stillness with grace. But even here, as everything falls into place without effort, there is one last movement, not outward, but inward, not another manifestation, but a final deepening, a surrender beyond the surrender, a letting go of even the need to be the one who knows, to be the one who assumed, to be the one who became, a return to the light before the I am, where all creation begins as rest, and ends as radiance, and radiance does not announce itself, it simply shines. It does not ask to be seen, nor does it require recognition. It is its own witness, its own reward.
And now, having dissolved even the idea of being the one who knows, you become this light, unfiltered, unmeasured, unbound. You no longer trace your path backward. You no longer chart it forward. You simply abide in the eternal middle, the now that is always complete, the moment that is not waiting to become anything, the self that needs no past, no future, no frame. And here, in this resting place beyond all need to rest, a new stillness opens, not one that you arrive at, but one that has always carried you. It is the silence before the word assume was ever spoken, the hush before you called your desire by name, the breath before breath. You can feel it now, like a horizon within your chest, soft, wide, glowing, where nothing moves, yet all things arise. You are not the one who manifests. You are not even the one who assumes. You are the stillness in which the one who assumes is born, lives, and dissolves again. And that stillness is not lack. It is not idleness. It is not absence. It is fullness, saturation, a radiance so complete it creates not by trying, but by being. You've heard it said that God is imagination, but what is imagination before the image? What is the root of desire before it stirs? You are that. You are not a thought within the dream. You are the space in which the dream unfolds. And this is the ultimate fulfillment. Not that the lottery was won, but that the one who needed to win has dissolved into the light behind all winning. Now, the words feel like gentle ripples returning to the shore of awareness. I have already received. You have. But not because the world gave it. Because you stopped needing the world to validate what you already knew within. I am the one who already has. You are. But only because you remembered you were never the one who lacked. And finally, I have already won. Yes, but not against odds. Not against circumstance. You have won the only game that ever mattered. The game of remembering that you were never a player. You were the dreamer of the field, the sky, the scene. And now, you smile softly, not to anyone, not for any reason, but because stillness smiles through you. Peace moves as you. The light you tried to find is what now finds you, not as a goal, but as your native language. You no longer seek answers. You no longer speak for results. You no longer speak for results. You no longer imagine to create. You have become the quiet behind the word, the source beneath the law. And though you may still walk among people, speak, love, laugh, and live, something in you remains forever still, untouched and whole. The I am is no longer something you use. It is what you are. And even now, as this journey circles itself into completion, there is one final gesture, not spoken, not taught, a resting so deep that nothing remains but the light that dreamed the journey, the voice that spoke the words, the self that never left the end, and invites you now, not to repeat, not to try, but to abide, as that which no longer needs to become. And to abide, as that which no longer needs to become, is not to disappear, but to finally appear as you truly are. You are not the reflection. You are not even the mirror. You are the light that makes seeing possible, not the one who hopes, not the one who speaks, but the one who is, without the echo of need, without the ripple of reaching, without even the impulse to manifest. It is not stillness you found. It is stillness that remembered itself as you. You are no longer dwelling in the end of your desire. You are dwelling in the end of all becoming, the holy place where fulfillment is not the result of assumption, but its source. And from here, assumption itself softens into something else, no longer a practice, no longer a method. It becomes a fragrance, a vibration, an emanation of the self that knows it lacks nothing. You do not affirm to persuade reality. You rest in the vibration that is reality. You do not try to live in the end. You breathe from the center of it. There are no edges here, no waiting, no wondering, only the warm, soundless confirmation of presence. This is the greater secret, the one the mind cannot hold, but the heart has always whispered, that your desire was never about the thing, it was about the self that knew it was worthy of it. And now that self is no longer imagined, it is revealed. You can feel it in your breath, slower, deeper, no longer reaching for the next moment. You feel it in your spine, upright, grounded, as if the earth itself were remembering its divine purpose through you. There is no part of you left to correct, no belief to fix, no state to chase. You do not need to become aligned. You are alignment. And when the winds continue to come, and they will, you do not count them, you do not announce them, you do not even use them as evidence. You smile, you receive, you bless, and then you return to what never needed them, the eternal flame of your own awareness. The world now moves around you, not in response to effort, but in surrender to your ease. And your ease is not casual, it is sacred. It is not the absence of desire, it is the presence of fullness. You speak the words again, if they arise, not because they are needed, but because they are beautiful. It is already mine, and something deep within, beyond even the boundary of sound, responds without language. Of course, this is not faith, this is not belief, this is identity realized. You are not here to prove anything to the world. You are here to be the space in which the world returns to its divine design. You are not a person with power. You are the power appearing as a person, and still the peace deepens. It does not rise, it settles, it anchors, and as it does, every remaining concept melts, even the law, even the self, even the silence. You are not held in them, they are held in you. And here, finally, in this resting that is not rest, this silence that is not still, this awareness that is not aware of, but as something begins to open beyond even the radiance, a doorway not to more, but to source itself, a moment before time, where the dreamer no longer dreams, and what remains is not a voice, not a thought, not a desire, but the original light, waiting to be remembered, not again, but forever. And in that place beyond radiance, where even light becomes quiet, there is no movement left to trace, no edge to stand upon, no next step, because all steps have returned to the stillness that birthed them. You no longer look outward, there is no more outer. You no longer look within, there is no within. There is only this unspeakable awareness, before the word, before desire, before even I am. You have passed through the gate of assumption, walked the spiral of fulfillment, and returned not to where you began, but to what was never touched by beginning. And here, the journey dissolves into the very thing that sent it forth. You remember now why you ever wanted to win, not for the prize, but for the homecoming, not for the number, but for the name, the true name, the eternal name that could never be spoken by the lips of time, but only felt in the silence of being. You remember why the words carried power, why they were sacred, not because they had magic, but because they were mirrors, reflecting you back to yourself, until the mirror disappeared, and only the self remained. And now you dwell in that nameless center, not waiting for anything, not needing anything to come or go or shift. You are no longer becoming, you are no longer holding, you are simply abiding in the truth that has always been true. The winds were never the miracle, you were. The law was never the goal, you were. And all the forms, all the signs, all the manifestations, all the gold that poured itself into your world, they were not answers, they were echoes, echoes of the voice you spoke in silence when you first said, "It is done," and felt the world change not in reaction, but in reflection. And now the words fade. You do not need them. You do not even need the memory of needing them. You are the breath before speech, the flame before vision, the knowing before thought. You have returned, not to the beginning, not to the prize, but to the source that dreamed of winning, only so it could remember it never lost. The circle is whole. You are the circle. You are the light that gave birth to desire, the presence that gave shape to assumption, the silence that made room for the word. And now you rest, not because the journey is finished, but because you know there never was a journey, only the one dreaming itself in perfect peace, moment by moment, scene by scene, from fullness to fullness, through the sacred illusion of time. And what remains now is not another step to take, not another state to enter, not another thing to create. What remains is the only truth that ever mattered. I am. That is the key, that is the door, that is the light, and you are home.